Good morning, dearest friends. It's Monday, the 21st of Sivan, June 20th. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Right now, we're studying Masechet Shabbat, and likely for the final time this cycle, chapter 16 of Masechet Shabbos, page Kuf Chaf Beis, that's 122. Just to refresh everyone's memory, the whole chapter Kol Kisei HaKodesh started revolving around dealing with fire, what can be saved. We spoke about saving the Torah scrolls and what is classified as part of the Torah scrolls or something holy. And we talked about salvaging food and the amounts of food that can be saved and who is included in this restriction and to what kind of area may those items be retrieved. We talked about other methods of fire fighting or fire or keeping the fire from spreading, such as covering a trunk, as you may recall, with a piece of material, and we asked about pouring water. We then went on to talk about protecting the flames from leaping up and catching onto a korah by covering it with a dish, which led us off to talk about covering up other items, such as human or waste, or a scorpion, which led us to a detour talking about killing dangerous creatures on Shabbos, trapping them. Distinction if they're chasing you or they're not chasing you, if they might be dangerous, if he just happens to be walking along or seeking it out. We talked about the distinction between malacha she'eina tzricha legufa or tzricha legufa, eina tzricha legufa, according to Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, if one is exempt, if they don't need the result or the effect of the malacha. And then we spoke about, then we have our Mishnah, which we're going to talk about now, which is the Mishnah about instructing a Gentile on Shabbos. Actually, I should correct myself. This was an offshoot of a previous Mishnah, which talks about instructing a Gentile as it pertains to turning off the fire. So that was the Mishnah that I failed to recap over here. Can you tell a Gentile? And the Mishnah says the bottom line was you can't tell them to put out the fire. You need to tell them to stop putting out the fire. So we discussed, is there some kind of intermediary language? Can you provide a refund, an incentive? And then we talked about children and the likelihood that a child is too directly associated to a father under most circumstances, which leads us now to a Mishnah, which is less immediately fire related, but a spin-off of the topic of instructing a Gentile with doing a malacha on Shabbos. And that was the Mishnah we started on Friday and we'll continue today. So why don't we share the screen and get started. Again, we are Kuf Chaf Beis 122b. I believe we read this Mishnah on Friday. Let's do it again. Did we do it?
We have a whistling sound in the background. I don't know if it's only
the whistling sound. I'm going to hit mute all, but it's possible the whistling sound you're hearing is a bird chirping overhead over here. So if it is, you're going to still hear that sound. But the bird stopped. All right. No. Goy shehidlik esaner. Yeah, we read this on Friday. Let's read it again. A Gentile, a Nachri, lit a candle on Shabbos. Well, no big deal. Says the Mishnah. Mishtamesh le'oro Yisrael, a Jew may use its light. V'im b'shvil Yisrael, however, if the Gentile lit the candle with the intention of it being for the Jew, asor, then that is prohibited. So a difference if the Gentile lit the candle for himself or for the Jew. If he lit it for himself, a Jew can tag along and enjoy it. But if it was done exclusively to benefit the Jew, a Jew is not allowed to have a Gentile do something exclusively in their behalf. I know it raises many questions about times and places and ways that we might have a Gentile do something for a Jew, but for now, let's just take the Mishnah at face value, which indeed expresses the sentiment of the halacha more or less. Mile mayim lahashkos behemtoi. If the Gentile fills up the trough with water to feed his animal, when the Gentile is finished and water is remaining, mashkeach harav Yisrael, the Jew is permitted to have his animals eat from there as well. What malacha was done here? Is there a malacha of pouring water from point A to point B from the sink to a bowl. So Rashi says the problem was Mibor Birshus Harabim. He's bringing water from the public domain into the private domain. That would be prohibited on Shabbos. A Jew would not be allowed to take something without an eruv from the public domain and bring it into the private domain. And thus, in Bishvil Yisrael, if he did this malacha exclusively in the favor of the Jew, for the Jew, or he may not make use of that water. We'll see Taisus. Maybe Taisus has another take on what was wrong over here. What malacha is wrong. Asa Gai, Kevesh Leirid Vai, the Gentile made a ramp to disembark from a boat. Rashi explained to us very beautifully how large ships, large boats, would have a large plank which would assist the folks from getting off of the ship. The Gentile did a malacha for himself. Yored Achar of Yisrael, the Jew, is permitted to also utilize that very ramp that was constructed. The Imbishvil Yisrael, but if the Gentile built the plank, set it up, assuming that there are malachos involved, well, then the Jew may not make use of the plank. My said Rabbi Gamliel is a Canaan. There was a story. Rabbi Gamliel and other Jewish elders were traveling on a ship. Shayubayim Basvina, they're coming on a boat. But also the Gentile used a plank to descend, to get off to disembark from the boat. The Yardu B'lai Rabbi Gamliel is a Canaan, and the elders, the sages, Rabbi Gamliel, and the sages made use of that ramp. Rashi, the alternative is probably to get wet or to go into a how do you call it? What do you call those little boats? Did we call it a dinghy? Alan, what do we call that boat that you take to get?
Dinghy, a dinghy.
A dinghy. So I guess they didn't have a dinghy, or maybe that wasn't up for discussion. And so they made use of that ramp. And that is our Mishnah. The Gemara is going to right away begin analyzing our Mishnah. And there's going to be one very important question. The question is, why does the Mishnah need to bring three different instances of a Gentile doing a malacha on behalf of a Jew? The Mishnah has the instance of a candle, the instance of drawing water, and the instance of the boat, the ramp on the boat. Why all three?
Rabbi, why can't we go on a cruise then and get off the boat when it reaches a certain port on Shabbos?
Well, there are
We
many
don't put out the ramp.
There are many other issues that need to be explored besides for the ramp. And so I didn't say here and now that one can't go on a cruise, but there are a variety of halachic considerations that need to be considered. But for the purposes of our Mishnah at this point, let's consider one issue, which is the ramp.
Well, when I read the story, I wonder, I'm trying to picture it, how it looked like. And it follows that the rabbis traveled for several days, obviously, if they disembark on Shabbos, at least 2 days. And when they disembarked, they didn't have any luggage or food remains or whatever, because they had to deal with carrying on Shabbat.
Yeah, and also they probably didn't select to disembark on Shabbos. I think in those days, a boating trip had a little bit less of a fixed schedule. My assumption when I read the Mishnah on Friday was, and we find a number of times that the Chachamim traveled from Israel to Rome to lobby on behalf of the Jewish people. There were different gezerot, decrees, and the like. And so it's possible that some of the considerations to not travel are waived in the event of a tzarech mitzvah for a mitzvah purpose, or even more extremely, maybe more than a mitzvah, but this one may have had life-saving implications. So it's possible.
It's also midrabanan.
Well, hold on, but it's possible. Hold the thought if you don't mind. It's possible that one would ideally not go on certain boats but there are times that one would have no choice, or halacha itself would give a hierarchy of suggestions saying that they should waive certain unadvisable behavior activities for the sake of protecting life or the like. Dr. Stamler, I'm sorry, please, you were saying something about derabanan.
That the Isser, if someone, for instance, lit the candle for a Jew and not for himself, I think it's from the Rabbanan. If you look at it,
Correct. So therefore what?
so there may be more of a leniency, not a leniency necessary, but it's not as.
Oh, so let's see. The Gemara is going to explain or probe why the Chachamim were comfortable utilizing a malacha that would have been done possibly on their behalf. And yes, the prohibition of Amir La'akum, the prohibition of communicating or requesting or getting a malacha done on your behalf by a Gentile is not a biblical prohibition. It is rabbinic. And although, of course, the observance of rabbinic halacha is as essential for a Jew as biblical halacha, there are, within the frameworks of the rabbinic enactment, certain waivers, waivers, exemptions, and variations or areas where they might allow one to do that, although otherwise they should not do so.
Rabbi,
Yes.
if we go to today, if a goy turns on the switch, you benefit whether you want or you don't want from the light.
I'm sorry.
A goy
we'll
turns
see,
on
we'll
turns
see the
on the
Gemara
switch.
story about what one should do, or not necessarily what one should do, but what someone did when the candle. So you're right. You can't unsee, but you might choose not to review documents, let's say, or whatever. So it's an interesting question.
I still don't understand how a Jew is not allowed to get off the boat.
Hold on.
The boat comes into dock. They're Gentiles who put out the ramp, and the Jew walks off without money in his pocket, without anything.
So I
He
don't
just wants
understand
to
your
walk
question.
around.
What's the question? How could a Jew go on a boat? How could a Jew not go on a boat?
Why is a Jew not allowed to get off the boat on
So
a
first of all,
Shabbos?
why can't a Jew not? Why may a Jew not get off a boat?
Yeah,
We did not say a Jew may not get off a boat. We said a Jew may not make use of a malacha that was done exclusively on their behalf. Now,
No,
your
but
question is
on Shabbos,
But
you cannot get off the
on
boat.
Shabbos. Well, we didn't say you can't get off. We said you can't get off making use of a malacha that a Gentile did exclusively on your behalf.
But isn't
Now,
it the
Alan's
Shita
question, hold
Yachid
on.
and the
Alan's
Shita
question,
Rabin?
I suppose, is what's the alternative? If the boat arrives in Haifa on Shabbos and you don't get off the boat, you're going to end up going into Lebanon if they keep on going up the coast. So it's not like you. So that's a good question. But right now, we're giving the halacha in isolation. Now, Alan, as far as a question of if one can or can't go on a boat, that's a broader conversation and beyond the scope of our mission. Our mission is simply talking about one specific malacha. We have in different locations around the Talmud talked about other issues. Another issue that's going to be another issue that actually comes to mind is how are you allowed to disembark from a boat? There's an issue of Tchum Shabbos. If the boat pulled into the harbor and it traveled 10 kilometers that day, well, that certainly brought you from outside of the Tchum, and you should maybe not even be allowed to get off the boat. So let's hold all those questions. There are good questions and other questions, but let's hold that for now. And first try to focus on the essential issue, the essential discussion, which is a Gentile doing something on your behalf or not, when it's permitted, when it's prohibited, and if there are any other considerations, exceptions, etc. Hold on one second. What I want to see is an exact breakdown of what the malacha of the ramp is in general. Is it bini? Is it boina? Is it muksa? All right, come with me.
Don't forget, they're not putting the ramp out just for the Jew. They're putting it for 1,000 people.
Maybe they are.
Oh, they're putting it out for 1,000 people. It's a cruise ship.
I'll tell you, one of the challenges I have when I learn Mishnah or Gemara is we like to impose, because we need to imagine the picture. So we add details that are not there. And then questions develop. So we have to read the Mishnah. The Mishnah makes no mention of other passengers. It's possible that the only passengers that were getting off in Israel were the Jewish passengers.
That's a different story.
Or the ship may have only had Jewish passengers at all. So we let's not add more facts than the Mishnah itself provides, simply so that we can analyze it to the best of our ability. But I share that question. So what about, I found here, what about Tchum Shabbos? I asked the question. There's an issue of Tchum Shabbos. And there's a Mishnah in Eruvin that says that one should not disembark from a boat if it arrived from outside of the Tchum. It's possible that one may leave the ship if it arrives to harbor before the onset of Shabbos. So maybe the boat arrived into harbor as sun was setting. And indeed, there are other details of the story that are discussed elsewhere because there are a number of facets involved. But, let's see the Gemara, and then we'll have a lot more information to go with.
Rabbi, one more thing to throw into the puzzle. If he owns the boat, is that Rishus Harabim or not?
We actually had a Gemara that discussed what the Rishus of a boat is, but let's put that on. You remember that discussion? Different size boats, and let's put that on hold for now. Good question though. The Gemara now tells us why the Mishnah brings three different instances, three different malachot that are done on behalf of the Jewish people. The Ashmin Aner. There's a chiddush about a candle, or a leniency, I should say. There's a strong reason that you should be allowed to use a candle. Mishum din ner le'echad, ner le'meya. If a Gentile uses a candle for himself, there's no extra fuel the Gentile has to put in so that a Jew should benefit. So in a sense, just because you're allowed to make use of a lamp that a Gentile kindled for themselves, lav dafke, not necessarily would one be allowed to make use of a malach of a Gentile where they may have actually added more stuff. Aval mayim. So again, a candle, you flip the switch. There isn't a different quantitative flip switching if one person is going to need the light or if four people are going to need the light, assuming they're in the same area. And so and certainly that was the case with a lamp. And so as long as the Gentile did it for himself, nothing was done in the Jew's agency and nothing could have been done. Aval mayi, when it comes to water, ligzar, there should be a gzera. You know why? Although maybe in this case he didn't, if we'll make it a habit to depend on a Gentile to fill up the water from outside of the Rishus Harabim on Shabbos, from the Rishus Harabim into the Rishus HaYachid, well, maybe next time the Gentile will do extra for the Jew. And yet we're saying that if the Gentile did it for himself, we don't make a gzera. Now, I'm surprised, Dr. Stalin, this is a beautiful line that we use, ner le'echad, ner le'meya. I've even heard, actually, who's Beryl? Maybe you used it? I've heard this phrase used by some of the dear members of our Chabura, ner le'echad, ner le'meya. So it's a beautiful truth, which is that a candle doesn't need more fuel for more people to be able to see it or to appreciate its light. The candle is something that everybody can equally benefit. So that's why we need the two instances, the case of the candle and the case of the water. Kevesh lamali, what's the chiddush? What's the added information, the added data from the story of the ram? Rashi explains, and Alan, I think you'll appreciate this. Hadum yediner. It's very similar to the candle. Why kevesh? La'echad kevesh lameya. Once you put out the gangplank, is that what you call it?
Gangplank is
that where you end up in the water?
That's right.
Okay.
Walk the plank.
Okay, so what do we call this? A ramp. Okay.
A ramp.
Yeah, hopefully you end up on dry land. So the ramp, the plank, is identical to the candle in that once it's out, many people can utilize it, and there's no extra engineering or construction, assuming that you don't have a lot of people on it at the same time, but people are just making use of it. There is no distinction, there's no difference between one person and many people. So the Gemara answers a beautiful answer. We added that instance so that we would have the opportunity to tell us a story of Rabbi Gamliel and the Zakenim, which, of course, when you have an anecdote, when you have actual, as we call it, Maaseh Rab, we have a story of the Chachamim of the Mishnah, that adds a lot of richness, that adds a lot of detail, a lot of insight. And so the story was added not because it adds necessarily to our comprehension, but because we gain greatly from the anecdote, from the story. What do we gain? And we have the Maaseh Rab. We have this story. Just to show you, the Meiri says, "Mila mayim in borsh rabim, sheish b'samar shos yachla shos rabim hashkes lahamtei mashka achar Yisrael." So he explains that we're talking about a case of bringing water from the public. Well, Rashi says it in one line, and he explains it more at length. V'im b'shvil Yisrael also lo yisa Yisrael. Pisha makes a mitzvah shelo ynesar lazel b'hamtei shinu tzishol. Interesting. There are some Bali Toises who say that the prohibition to make use of this water would only be for the animal. But maybe if there's leftover water and it was done for the Jew, it was done by the Gentile for the Jewish animal, maybe the Jew himself would be able to drink it. He technically could drink from the water fountain in the public domain, so this didn't really help him in a significant way, so he should be able to drink this water. However, others disagree. Well, there you have it. Let us continue our Gemara, a discussion about a Gentile doing malach on behalf. Actually, hold on. I'm sorry. Let's get ahead of ourselves for a moment. Mishnah Torah. This is the Rambam. A Gentile did a malacha on his own, unsolicited. In Bishvil Yisrael Asa Isa, if it was done without being requested, but for a Jew, one may not enjoy the effect of this malacha until after Shabbos. And you have to wait the amount of time it would take for that malacha to be done. But if the Gentile did it only for himself, well then it is entirely permissible on Shabbos. Next, Mishnah Kesed, give us an example. Our Mishnah, a Gentile lit a candle, Yisrael. A Jew may use it in the Yisrael also, but if it was done for the Jew, he may not. Also, the Mishnah then brings the instance of our Mishnah of the ramp. You're allowed to go behind it unless it was done for him. Also, our Mishnah as well. And then the next part of the Mishnah is our Gemara as it continues. So stand by. With Hashem's help, when we make a Siyum on the Mishnah, we'll go back into the Shulchan Aruch and we'll have some fun there too. Here, Tana Rabbanan. Another instance, another discussion about a Gentile doing Malach Shabbos. Goy shaliket asavim. A Gentile collected grasses, which are to feed his animal. Machil achar Yisrael. A Jew is allowed to have his animal feed from those trimmed items after the Gentile is done feeding his animals. But if the Gentile did it with the intention of benefiting the Jew, also similar example to what we're familiar with. Rashi, Machal achar Yisrael, es behemtai. The achar of dafka, he can only do it once the Gentile is concluded It's clear that the Gentile did it exclusively for himself. What's left over is left over. If the Gentile, again, this is a brisa. If he fills up water for his animal, the Jew can also have his animal drink the leftovers. But if it was done exclusively for the Jew, also. When do we say that a Jew is allowed to make use of the Gentile's work? When the Gentile doesn't know him. But if the Gentile and the Jew know each other, then one is not allowed to make use even after the Gentile is finished. Rashi. Because if they know each other, the Gentile sees the Jew waiting around with his animal, even though the Gentile needs to feed his own animal. We suppose he's going to also have in mind to do the malacha for the Jew. This is a brisa,
Rabbi,
which puts a major restriction on when a Jew may make use after the fact of a Gentile's malacha on Shabbos. Rebel?
I'm surprised because now we're going into the Gentile's intention. I was thinking if he cuts grass or he does something, doesn't mean that it's going to be for the Jew, but it turns out that he has some left. So now we have to say what's the intention of the goy? He's not doing anything wrong.
We're not talking about the guy doing anything wrong. We're talking about a Jew making use of a Gentile's malacha.
So he cuts some extra grass. He doesn't know it's for the Jew, not for the Jew.
So let's see. The Gemara is gonna probe this. So let's. We're still in the middle of a sentence here, if you will.
Rabbi, we have an electrical grid. The whole electrical grid, is it made for the Jews? Is it made for whoever lives there?
Let's see if we'll get any insight at the close of this Gemara. Let's see if we'll have any information.
I see why the Karaite Jews stay in the dark on Shabbos.
Hold on. We're getting ahead of ourselves here.
In Israel, there are many, especially in Bnei Brak, allowed to have their own generators.
Yeah, but that's for a different reason, I think, right?
I don't know. I think it was specifically for Shabbos. I don't know. I don't, but they have their own generators. Also because there's not enough electricity with the way they keep on building upon building. But, and they use basements and they're not connected to the system. But I think there was also an issue with whether they're allowed, even though the national electric company uses generally goyim, Arabs or non-Jews to work on Shabbos. But they do it for everyone, so it's applicable today.
A lot of problems. You're in a hotel, they clean up your room, all kinds of problems.
Yeah, the Bnei Brak, I think they don't want to use the grid on Shabbos because they're. So I think there are some Jews that are still on it because of security, and they're going to say, well, that Jew's working on Shabbos, so they won't use it. But usually they end up with so many fires because of those generators are not so safe. It becomes a kind of. They also say that the electric grid is used in the hospital, so therefore, even if the Jew is doing something on Shabbos, it's pekuach nefesh. And somebody else, I guess it's the same type of thing. If it's pekuach nefesh, then can someone else take advantage of it for something else? Just like the Arab did, the Goy did it for himself, and the Jews take advantage.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's take a look. Does this make sense here? That if the Gentile plucks grass, machil achar Yisrael, the Jew can feed his animal. The a person is allowed to have their animal stand on grass that is growing, that's still attached, but you may not give your animal the opportunity to graze. Al gabi muktzah, what's muktzah? Rashi Shabbos leirois v'leikol lemigzah shama yitlosh v'yachil. Ve'inem mamid al gabi muktzah shama yitol v'yada v'yachil. Stuff that was plucked on Shabbos, a Jew should not bring his animal there. We're afraid the Jew will end up picking it up, which is muktzah. What is muktzah? Something that was not available to you yesterday, before Shabbos, and therefore it was entirely out of your mind. So these items and anything that's on the tree is muktzah to a Jew on Shabbos. So if you find a whole bunch of stuff that was plucked on Shabbos, it's muksa to the Jew, but you're less likely to be conscious of the fact that it's muksa and you might feed your animal. And therefore, Rav Huna taught in the name of Rabbi Chanina that you shouldn't bring your animal to eat muksa, which means these grasses that were plucked. At least that's how Rashi explains it. So the Gemara answers, the kam labapa. What we're talking about here is that he's standing in front of him, forcing the animal to graze there, but not actively feeding him. So he could stand in front of the animal and make the animal go towards those foods, but he should not bring the animal right there, lest he make the mistake and do muksa. Let's see Rashi. If you bring the animal there, you might end up picking it up with your hands. But not, yeah. He can kind of keep the animal directed towards those grasses, but he shouldn't bring them there specifically. So the Jew should stay extra far away when feeding the animal from plucked grasses. And so this teaching tells us that you should not bring your animal to eat stuff that's muksa. And what did this brisa here say? Okay, I'm sorry. So what's the question? The question is, can you bring your animals to eat those grasses? Rav Huna says no. The answer is you're not actively feeding it. You're simply bringing it to the general vicinity and directing the animal to them, but not bringing the animal right to that location. Does that make sense? Yeah, as long as the Jew himself avoids being right in that pile of stuff, he should be okay. That is the first comment, question, analysis of this brisa. Amar Mar. Now we have to go and figure out the other statement we said before, which is that that the permission to make use of a Gentile's malacha is only when you don't know him. But if you know him, you can't. Well, that gives us a little bit of a problem. You know what the problem is? Our Mishnah strongly asserts that you may make use of malacha from a Gentile that he did for themselves, even if you do know him. What's the problem? Problem is our Mishnah. Let's read. The Brisa says that if the Gentile knows the Jew, we assume, as Rebero says, we go into the mind of the Gentile. And then we know the Gentile is going to have in mind, I'm going to take care of myself, I'm going to take care of my friend, and we can't have a Gentile doing malacha for a Jew on Shabbos. Oh, Rabbi Gamliel Makirei have it. We have a story about a boat. Rabbi Gamliel and his friends spent a while on a boat with Gentile workers. And when they arrived in the port, the Gentiles placed down the plank, the ramp. Obviously, they knew each other. And they were willing to make use of the malacha, which challenges the assertion of the Braisa. So how are we going to answer this? And more importantly, what kind of additional halachic insight are we going to gain into the restriction and the limits to the restriction of making use of a Gentile's malacha for a Jew on Shabbos? Rashi, first of all, Makiri Hava, he knew the Gentiles. How do I know? Shari B'Sfina Hayaba'imai. We assume that they got to know each other. And by the way, Alan, this is where my imagination tells us that this boat was not quite a cruise ship, because you could be on a cruise ship and not know everybody or every member of the staff on the cruise ship. But if you're going on one of those much smaller ships that I imagine they would have been using in the Roman Empire around 1900 years ago, those boats were a whole lot smaller. Maybe there's 30 people on the boat, maybe less, and so likely he did know them. So Amar Abai says simple. Shaloi b'fanav hava. When the malacha was done, Rabbi Gamliel and the other rabbis were in their cabins. They were nowhere near that, and so the Gentile would not have had them in mind. Which, by the way, Alan, that makes me think that there were other passengers that were Gentiles. Rashi Shaloi b'fanav hava kisha so lo haya Rabbi Gamliel sham the so he didn't have him in mind. Amar Rava says, even if the Gentile did this aware that Rabbi Gamliel is there. A ramp is ner le'echad, ner le'meya. Once you set up the ramp for one person, there's no added effort, and there's no possibility for an added effort to benefit the Jew. Unlike the water and the grass, which you have to add more, and the Gentile
Rabbi.
may have added more, and he may have
Rabbi.
done it in a relatively subconscious way, but he could have done it on behalf of the Jew. So we have two
Rabbi.
different answers. Abaya says the Gentile didn't know about it, and Rava says we don't care if the Gentile knew about it because it's all the same. Rashi kevesh la'echad kevesh l'meya. Afal gabi asavim. When it comes to grasses, keshu makirei marbe b'shvilai. When he has a friend nearby, he's going to make sure to add additional stuff.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
one of these days I'm going to cross the line. You're going to throw me out of here altogether.
Meh.
So when we say a goy, it's a male or female?
I believe so. Yeah.
So you have a maid in the house that you pay. So everything that she does on Shabbos, in a sense, she's doing for you.
Yeah.
So it doesn't create a problem?
Well, it first of all does create a problem. Second of all, we're still at the beginning of the discussion, and we're going to have some of the discussion later on in the Gemara. But there are a variety of issues to consider. Not everything that the maid does is a malacha, and sometimes the malacha that the person is doing is actually for their own benefit. So an example would be if their job is to clean the house, and imagine that sweeping is not a malacha, but it's easier for them to use a vacuum cleaner. So then the vacuuming is being done because it helps her.
So are you allowed to benefit?
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes. By the way, again, I want to just remind before we get into any more of the halachic nitty gritty. This is a no psak zone, so I'm not here to talk about what you should do. I'm happy to talk about the theory of how the ideas of the Mishnah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question. So we're saying that.
Hold on. Is it very connected to this, or is it a hypothetical?
Yes. We're saying that we cannot tell a goy to do a melacha for us. Correct?
Correct.
How about a dog?
That's an interesting question. A Jew should not have
They're
their
very
dog
trained.
either, to my knowledge.
They're
It's a
very
interesting
trained.
question. There's basically, as I think I
Sorry.
said when we first tasted a little bit of the discussion of Amira La'akum, it's one of the most complex areas of Shabbos, and it's also one of the areas of Shabbos where we probably are most likely to get things askew.
I didn't hear the question. Sorry.
He asked if you can have a dog do a malacha. Can you ask the dog to press the elevator button or to fetch you
They're very
something?
trained, right, Bernie?
It's a great question.
Bernie, the dogs are trained.
No, but you have handicapped people that their animals do everything for them.
Exactly, but not for them. I'm saying for us. They're trained to do things for us.
Yeah.
Alan, I want to show
a
you.
dog for a blind person. There's all kinds of stuff. Wow.
That's not a malacha. Alan, I want to show you Toysers. I think you'll like it. Omer Abaya shalei b'fanav hava. Abaya says Rabbi Gamliel was not around. Doesn't Abaya know that ner le'echad ner le'meya, the same ramp that's open for one is open for many? So nearly the moida Abaya the ner le'echad ner le'meya. Abaya agrees that usually ner le'echad ner le'meya. In this case, there's something very unique. Im haya b'fanav, if Rabbi Gamliel was around, then the whole accommodation would have really been done having Rabbi Gamliel in mind. Shoyanasi, Visar, Viroish, Vasfina. He was a macher. He was a nasi. He was a royalty. And he was the main passenger of the ship. And so if he was there, many people might enjoy the malacha, but there would be something very central about Rabbi Gamliel's role. Maybe Alan, if not for Rabbi Gamliel, instead of putting the plank all the way to shore, they would have let everybody jump off and get all wet and, figure it out. But they had Rabbi Gamliel, a very chashuv passenger. And so inevitably, when you have such a honorable guest, the malacha becomes primarily about them. So it's possible It's an interesting Tosfos, and he tells us that Abaye usually would agree, but over here we get into the mind of the staff. All the staff are thinking, oh, and think about it more. They're thinking if we do the job right, we do it with the right style, maybe we'll get a tip. So everyone is thinking about Rabbi Gamliel, and so therefore, according to Abaye, he would have to be absent. He would have to be in his cabin or something for that not to make a mark. Interesting thing I might have not considered. So let us see the Gemara. The Gemara is not done yet. Yeah, the commentary further talk about how Rabbi Gamliel would have had to have been known by the staff. They would have known him. Obviously, he was this big hush of a guy, you know. Let's see the Gemara continues.
Rabbi, just a small point. So if they put off the ramp with Rabbi Gamliel in mind, the rest of the Yidden are okay.
Maybe, maybe not. That's a good question. So you're asking another question. I'm not going to give you the answer, but I'm going to say the question. Rabbi Beryl's asking if a malacha was done for one Jew. Maybe that Jew can't use the malacha, but what about the other Jews? Can other people make use of the malacha? It was not done having them in mind. Good question.
Tell you, one day you're going to have problems with robots telling Alexa to do something or not telling it.
Or programming them before Shabbos. Let's take a look. Mason, a challenge. Rava said, Ner lecha, ner lemeya. Amr lehed Rabbi Gamliel, hoyel v'shaloi b'fanenu aso neired boy. Happens to be that the story that our Mishnah alludes to has an elaborated version in the Tosefta. Excuse me. And the Tosefta says that Rabbi Gamliel told them, you know why we should go off the boat? Shaloi nasa b'fanenu. Being that we weren't around, therefore we can make use of it. So the story itself seems to disprove what Rava is saying. Our answer is Ema Hoyel v'asoi Nered boy. Maybe we have to revise the language of the Mishnah to be supportive of Rabbi Gamliel's way. To read Hoyel v'asoi Nered boy. Now that it's already been done, we can go down. Rashi Hoyel v'shloi b'fanenu. Kashi l'Rava. The masmum bina the panav aser. V'af al pi she'en kan marbe b'shvilai. Had the person been present, it would have been a problem according to language. So he says, maybe the story, the matter of fact was that he wasn't around, but even if he would have been around, it would have been okay because ner le'echad, ner le'meya. So maybe we can squeeze out of it. I know this is a little challenging for me, but that's how the Gemara would justify, or that's how Rava would justify his opinion. Tashema, now let's have a problem.
Rabbi, I find that very ambiguous, because if he let Rabbi Gamliel let off and all the Jews followed him, then you can't say it was meant for Rabbi Gamliel.
No, hold on.
They did it for the Jews.
No, both factors. No. What we're saying is like this. There's two potential factors here to allow the Jews to make use of this ramp. Either because it makes no difference, even if they knew about them. Ultimately, ner le'echad, ner le'meya. There was no extra malacha. So long as one Gentile had to get off, they would have had to put the ramp down. Just because the Jews also want to get off, that doesn't mean that there was any extra malacha. That's option A. And that's the opinion of Rava. And Abaye says, no, they were not out of sight. So it obviously wasn't done for them. So the Brisa initially, the Gemara challenges Rava's interpretation because the story seems to have been that they were not around, which kind of supports Abaye's opinion. So the Gemara answers, they weren't, the story was they were not around, but the rationale may have been ner le'echad, ner le'meya. Basically, not every fact, life happens the way it happens. Not every detail of the story was choreographed to reflect the halachic nuance. Happens to be they were not there. That doesn't mean that the reason of the heter, the reason to make use of it, was because they weren't there. And that would be Rava's argument.
Rabbi,
Abaya obviously will say no. That detail was essential for the reason why they were allowed to disembark.
Rabbi,
Yes.
why isn't the point brought up? For the majority of cases, the boat arrives, they take down a ramp. Every time the boat arrives, doesn't depend who's on the boat, not on the boat. It's like, when you land on a plane.
Well, maybe in those days it wasn't obvious. Maybe in those days, if you didn't pay the fare,
Okay, so
they would
then
make you swim.
my question is, if it's a routine thing, does that mean we don't have a problem?
I don't know. I don't know how routine and today every boat there's like protocol. The cruise arrives into port, and I was never on a cruise, but I can imagine that right away they're going to arrange for the ramp to be in position, assuming people are supposed to disembark, so that they can do so safely. Maybe in those days it was a little more rudimentary, or maybe it was a little less. It was a little less of a a precise methodology. Here, let's see. Now we're going to ask a challenge. We're going to see a third brisa that seems to muddy the waters and possibly would challenge both Rava and Abaya. Toshima. And again, we have 10 minutes. I want to make this Siyum. I want to close out Masechet chapter 16. However, whether it's today or tomorrow, I want to take a look at the Shulchan Aruch. I want to see the halacha. It's not going to give us the full picture, but it'll fill in some additional blanks, some of the questions that were asked. Toshima. Let's hear a source to weigh in on our question. Here, a city that has a mixed population of Jews and Gentiles. The Hoysa by Merchatz, Hamerchetzes b'Shabbos, and it had a bathhouse that people would make use of on Shabbos. Im Roiv Goyim, if the majority of the population are Gentile, Mutter Lirchais B'Miyad, a Jew may right away make use of it after Shabbos, says Rashi. L'moitze Shabbos. Im Roiv Yisrael, but if most of the people in the city are Jewish, Yamtin b'chdei sheyechamu chamin, they have to wait after Shabbos the amount of time that it takes to heat up the bathhouse after Shabbos. We call this b'chdei sheyasu, the amount of time that it would take for the malacha to have been done after Shabbos. What's the problem here? You could have a community, you could have a mixed use, Jew and Gentile. Didn't Rava say ner le'acha ner le'meya? It's the same malacha. There's no difference how many people use the bathhouse, let's say. Especially in those days, it was a single act of heating it up. So why can't a Jew use it, even if there are many Gentiles? Even if there's only one Gentile and it was done for the Gentile, why can't the Jews use it? Ner le'acha ner le'meya. And according to Abaya, it was shalai b'fneim, the Jews were not around. And so the Jews should be allowed to use it. So both Abaya and Rava should be challenged by this text. It is shalai b'fanav, and it is ner le'echa ner le'meya, the same act. So Abaya and Rava should be both confounded by this text. The Gemara answers, Chacham, ki mechamemi, when the attendant of the bathhouse heats up the shvitz, adata deruba mechami. Here he actually has in mind the majority of the population. And so if the majority of the population is Jewish, that's what he has in mind. And it's a problem. Therefore, Abaya would say, I don't care if they weren't present. Usually, if they're not present, they're not in mind. But here, the attendant is doing it for the city. And Rava, who says, ner le'echa ner le'meya, usually you just have in mind the one Gentile you have in mind. Here it doesn't work that way. Why? Because he's having in mind the majority of the people. Let's read Rashi. He should not have any extra hana from the fact that they heated up the bathhouse on Shabbos. If I had a highlighter, I would pull out a highlighter here. When all things that were done on Shabbos that a Jew may not make use of, the sages gave a rule. Lehamtin le'erev, to wait in the evening, b'chdei sheyasu, the amount of time that it would take to have the malacha done anew. Although here, turning on the bathhouse for one person is the same as for 100. It's in a single flipping of a switch. Let's say that it turns on the heating. It's as if you know the person and you're having them in mind. Because it's ultimately being done to have them in mind. Even though it's a challenge, and therefore we answer Adata the Ruvacham. The malacha is being actively done for the majority of the population. In a scenario where it's a one-on-one, one Jew, one Gentile, then the Gentile is doing it for himself. Basically, here's how I understand the way Rashi explains the answer.
Oh, you don't need your.
A very good answer. There's a massive difference.
90%.
There's a massive difference, says the Gemara, especially with Rashi's explanation, between when a person does something for themselves and someone else manages to tag along, and a professional whose job is to provide a utility. When a Gentile needs something done for himself and he does it. So that's what he had in mind. He had himself in mind. People are by nature, this has nothing to do with Jew and Gentile. The only reason why it's relevant here is because we're talking about the laws of Shabbos. A Gentile doesn't need to keep Shabbos, a Jew does. But a person does something selfishly, not because people are bad, because people are humans. And humans generally are more aware of their own needs and desires. Therefore, when a Gentile does something for himself, so long as the Jew is not there, so it's not in his mind, the Jew can make use of it. When it's an attendant who's doing it for the town, well, then he has in mind the people of the town. And when you ask a person, when you look at the demographic report of the town, 51%, that's who he's doing it for. So 51% of the people are Jewish. Well, then the Jews are going to be a significant part of the malach, and therefore it's prohibited. And therefore, this case of the merchatz does not throw a wrench, does not challenge the opinion of Abai and Rava. What it does do is it provides us a whole lot of clarity about, or it adds a whole another section, another item to consider in the laws of a Gentile doing malacha. You have to distinguish between a professional who's running a public utility on behalf of a community, and a private entity, a private individual who's doing something for themselves. Now let's see the Gemara. We're almost 3 minutes, and we're going to make the Siyum. Go through this fast. Hashema. Now we're going to challenge Rava. Rava's the one that says, you have a lamp at a party or an event. If the majority of the people there are Gentiles, a Jew may use the fire, but if the majority of the people are Jewish, asur, you may not. 50-50. Half the people are Jewish, half the people are Gentile, still asur. What's the problem? Rava says, on here, we're clearly looking and considering who they have in mind when they light the candles. So the more answers in a banquet, when they put on the lamps, adata the ruba madliki, they're doing it on behalf of the majority of the population. Rashi people imrav Yisrael asur. Here it's like in a case where the person sees his friend who he knows. Hoyel the ruba ninu, being that the Jews are the majority. Asik adatei lahadlik. He has in mind to light the candles on their behalf. Let's read really fast, and here's where we'll make our Siyum. Shmuel ikul lebei Abi Toran. Shmuel, the great Shmuel, he was a doctor. We read about him not long ago. Remember when he greeted Rav? He went to the house of Abi Toran. A Gentile came and he lit a candle. What did Shmuel do? Adrinu Shmuel lapei. Shmuel turned his face to the side to make as little use of the candle as possible. But what happened? Then he saw the Gentile come, bring a document, and start reading it. Omar, he said, now I know he did it on his own behalf. Now he was comfortable making use of the candle because he realized that it was not for him, it was for the Gentile. Hadron Allah, Kistan, with these lines, with this story, we close out our study of the 16th chapter of Masechet Shabbos called Kisei Kodesh, which again, as you may recall, was dominated primarily with the discussion of salvaging from fire. Now, although we've made the Siyum of this chapter, B'li Neder, tomorrow, I'd like to pick up, close out a few loose ends, take a look at the Shulchan Aruch and do a fast reading of the laws of these laws of instructing of a Gentile does malacha. We're certainly not going to do justice to the topic, but I want to give us a little more insight. And now it is 11 o'clock. Let's close out with prayerful wishes for Refuah
Where's the
Shlema.
vodka? Where's the vodka?
Hold on, the vodka comes when we finish a Masechta. If we're gonna have vodka every time we finish the perek, we'd be a little shikker.
Rabbi,
Okay, hold on, l'chaim, dear friends. We're gonna
L'chaim.
say l'chaim for Leah Bas Esther Shishaba Refuah Shlema, and we pray and wish that all the dear members of this Chabura who devote time every day to study the Gemara, and don't just devote time, but they devote brain cells and effort and thoughtfulness to make this share interesting, insightful, and to help me learn this Gemara in the most beautiful way. I want to thank you all, and I pray that everyone should have the health, the strength, and the good blessings in their family and households to have the circumstances to learn. And we should continue our journey through the entire Talmud. And tomorrow, with Hashem's help, we'll pick up, closing out, we'll see the halachas of the end of chapter 16, and then we'll jump into chapter 17, Kol HaKelim, they told them Shabbos. And I'll just tell you this. One of the most well-known words of Shabbos is the word muktzah. But why muktzah? What is muktzah? What kind of vessels can a person, or tools, can a person use on Shabbos? What kind of tools might a person not be allowed to handle on Shabbos? And why? All the theories of muktzah, or much of the theories of muktzah, will be discussed in the coming chapter. We'll have a lot of fun doing it. My dear
Can I
friends, thank
slip
you all
in
so
a
much.
fast question before you take off?
Go ahead.
So if we remember with the fire, we were not allowed to tell him not to put out the fire. So if a goy goes to put on lights in a big hall, we would have a problem saying, don't put on in this corner where we are?
Possibly, yeah. If the Gentile is not allowed to do malacha, it is possible, hashtag no psak, but it is possible that you should have the person stop. Tomorrow, B'li Neder will take a look a little bit about that conversation. Ayashikayach, everyone.
Thank you. That's your call.
Feel free to rejoin in just a moment to study today's Chumash. A wonderful day. Mazel tov. Thank you all.
Should only have the koyach to continue
Amen.
Easier to go down the ramp than up the
for
ramp.
many years.
Amen. Amen.